Now we're going to assemble the main Vision 3D printer frame. The good news is that whether it's the Vision standard printer, the Home Team, the Vision Plus, or the Vision Bigfoot, the frame assembly is all going to be about the same. The only difference will be the length of the rods in here, and then potentially the spacing in between the two acrylic panels. So anyway, we're going to get started here, and what you're going to need is you're going to need a total of 133 parts are going to get assembled in here. You'll need all 7 of the largest threaded rods, which is all but 2 of the threaded rods. The 2 smallest diameter threaded rods are 6mm threaded rods, and those are for your Z-axis motor. You're going to use all of the 5/16 18 threads per inch rods in this. You're going to need 11 printed parts, 2 Z-motor mounts. You're going to need 2 Z-rod coupler clamps. Going to need 6 bar clamps, and these bar clamps really haven't changed much in most of the RepRap printer series. And you're also going to need the Y motor mount. So some people call it the Y bracket, but this is what we're going to need. So there's your 11 parts for the printed parts. All of those printed parts were printed on a Vision Series 3D printer. So you're going to need 50 of these 5/16 nuts. So with the exception of possibly 2 nuts that you can use to mount the Z coupler onto the Z motor, you're going to use almost all, if not all of the 5/16 inch nuts on this assembly. So you need 50 of those. You need 4 of the small M3 nuts, so those are really small nuts in there. You're going to need 4 of the M3 half thread per millimeter 25mm socket head cap screw. You're going to need 4 of your number 6 washers. They're the small little washers that are in the kit. You're going to need a total of 47 of the 5/16 inch washers. You're going to need your 2 acrylic panels, of course. One of the 2 acrylic panels, if you look, has holes in it. 4 holes in the back side of one of them. The other one has no holes. The holes are basically for the mounting of your hardware for your controller, which is the main printer controller. And one thing to notice is that to assemble the Vision Series printer, the acrylic sidewalls have the lower hole here has to line up. So the 2 Visions always have to line up if you look at them. And the reason is if you flip it, you will see that the lower middle hole is off. So it's actually offset to the rear so that the Z smooth rod can actually mount correctly. So anyway, so you need those 2. You need all 7 of the largest threaded rods, which are 5/16 inch threaded rods. If they're a little lopsided, we're not going to worry about that. And the reason is because it's small angle approximation theory says that the deviation in length, which is really what we care about, is next to nothing. So you can't even register it if you measured it with calipers. So anyway, so I'm going to use up all 7 of those. And then we're going to use some tools. The tools that we need really are only 4 of them right now. Oh yeah, let's not forget. You're going to need 4 of the 608 ZZ bearings. And if you look, they have oil saturated in them. So what we're going to do is kind of take those out. We're just going to put them in a paper towel or tissues. And we're just going to kind of get rid of any of that excess oil off of there, because we don't really need it. We don't really want it on the printer. The bearings are sealed, so all we're trying to do is just get rid of any of the excess oil that's there. And then we're just going to put those back on the table. You're going to need the 2.5mm Allen wrench, which is the standard Allen wrench that you use on all the M3 socket head cap screws. So if it fits correctly and it's snug, that is the middle size Allen wrench that we included in the kit. You'll need the 1/2 inch combination wrench, which is also a 13mm wrench. You'll need the adjustable wrench, and you'll need your set of calipers. So let's get started building this. If you look, the four shortest rods in here, the four shortest rods are used for the bottom four holes, the two holes in the front and the two holes in the back. So there's the back two, there's the front two holes. And then the very longest rod, there's one of them that's slightly longer than the others. That's actually for your middle lower hole. And then of course that leaves the two second to longest rods, and those are actually going to be used for your two top holes. So let's get started. We're going to take one of the shortest rods of the threaded rods, and we're going to do the lower front hole for the two panels, and we're not going to actually assemble it into the acrylic panels just yet. We're just actually just going to put on the couple of the nuts and a couple of the washers. So what you want to do is just kind of thread them on there and just kind of get them a little bit, you know, about 25 millimeters, 1 inch from the edge, because these are actually going to go all the way out to the edge of the panel. So right now all we care about is actually just getting them done. We're also going to put the washers, if you look, so that there's a sharp side and a rounded side. As I've said before, we want the sharp side towards the nut, so that the rounded side, which is also the smooth side, if you take your finger on there, that's actually going to go up against the acrylic. And the reason is just because if you cut the acrylic, it's going to show a little bit of light when you light them up with your lighted panels. It's not really going to you know, do anything to the acrylic that's going to crack it or anything, but we want to make sure that the acrylic stays really looking as good as it possibly can. We're going to do the same thing to the other end. So take a 5/16 inch nut, and once you get it started there a little bit, then you can just kind of quickly rub it back and forth, and there you go. And we're going to put next washer on there, sharp side towards the nut, and there you go. There's your first rod that's ready for the acrylic panels. So next up, and if the washers fall off of there, that's no big deal. The next one that we're going to do is the front top lower bracket, or top lower threaded rod. So with this one, it's a little more complex because we're going to actually put a couple of the bar clamps on there. We are going to put a couple of the 608 ZZ bearings in there, and in preparation for the Y-axis motor. We're going to actually put some of the nuts and the washers to be able to hold the acrylic on there. So this one, what we're going to do first is always just kind of start with the nut, put it on there, and just kind of get it there as quickly as you can. And sometimes, if you know you've got to actually put a couple of them together, you can actually do two at a time. But for this one, we're just going to kind of get it in the middle there. We don't really want to adjust it yet until we get the whole thing sort of assembled. So we're not too worried exact, you know, placement for that. Right now, we're just going to kind of get it assembled. And because this one's in the middle, we're going to put washer. Next, we're going to put two of the 608 ZZ bearings. So stack two of them together. Put those on there. I'm going to then put yet another washer, and you're going to then put another nut. And if you look, this differs greatly from the standard Prusa build on RepRap. They like to use just one single bearing here, and in place they like to use fender washers, which are really big washers. I mean, they're quite a bit bigger than the other thing. The standard washers for those. The problem with fender washers and using one simple little bearing here is that your belt, when it gets slightly off one way or the other of a single bearing, then it causes for inaccuracies in printing. Then the belt starts to rub on here, and you start skipping steps. And so we're getting rid of these. We're not even going to use any fender washers. If you look at one of the original kits, when we originally did Kickstarter, we used to use two doubled up 608 bearings, washers, and then the fender washers. Well, the funny thing is, the belt never actually ever touches the fender washers, but when you actually go and you put down this on the table, you can actually scuff your table with those, so we're getting rid of those. We also shortened up these smooth rods so that when you flip it over, the only thing you're going to touch is the bar clamps. So no more fender washers. We can throw these out. So let's go ahead and finish this up. and get that one on there. Like I said, it doesn't have to be super tight right now. You can kind of leave it loose. We just want to make sure that they're all right in the right positional location on the rod right now. We don't really care about the exact precision of where that is. So in the scheme of things, it's kind of like setting up a line, and we want to make sure that the line's got all the pieces in the correct order. So we're going to put yet another nut in there. Then we're going to put a washer, and this time, because it's going up against a bar clamp, we don't care whether it's got the sharp edge in or out. Usually I put the sharp edge towards the plastic piece for everything but the acrylic panels. I'm going to put a bar clamp. We're going to put yet another washer. I'm going to put another nut. So it'll be nut, washer, bar clamp, washer, nut. And that's how all the bar clamps are going to be for all 6 of them. Okay, we're not really caring about having it tighten up or the spacing. So then we're going to put yet another nut on this side and get that one on there about an inch. I'm going to put the washer, and this time we want sharp edge towards the nut. And we're going to leave it like that because the acrylic panel will go in here, then we'll have another washer and another nut. So let's do the other side. The other side is a mirror image of this side, so we're going to put yet another nut. Sometimes they're a little difficult to start up, but once you get it started, it works pretty fast. I've seen people use drills. Personally, this is my preferred method, but you can do anything you want. Washer, bar clamp, another washer, and another nut. So same deal. Nut, washer, bar clamp, washer, nut. Okay, and so that's pretty close. So now we're going to put another nut and about 25 millimeters, 1 inch in there, and a washer. Smooth side out, sharp side towards the nut, and that will be the end of the bar that is on the top front hole. Let's just kind of move these back a little bit. We're going to put all of these here. I kind of like to pre-assemble these things before I go and I put it into the acrylic panel. It's just my personal preference, and then I kind of wrestle all 7 of them to get them to fit really. Okay, for the third rod, we're going to tackle the top rear rod, and so let's go ahead and start off with another nut. And with this one, in the middle of it, it's going to have not only 2 of the ZZ bearings, but it's also going to have this Y motor bracket. So let's go ahead and get a nut on there. About in the middle of the rod, maybe slightly farther in the middle. I'm going to put a washer. And then this time, we're going to put the top hole of the motor bracket in there. So, and then we're going to put yet another washer. And this time, I'm going to put the sharp edge towards this, and that leaves the rounded edge towards the 2 ZZ bearings we're going to put on. And we're going to do the same kind of trick there again, kind of like acrylic. We're going to put the rounded edge, and that way it makes sure that there's no way that any of this edge is actually going to touch the washer. Put that on there, and put a final nut. And get that on there. And sometimes the washers kind of hang up there a little bit, so it doesn't have to be, once again, super accurate. But you notice the lack of fender washers on either side. This gives it a much cleaner look. It also allows me to pull the pulley in a little bit closer to the motor, so it puts a lot less torque on the motor as it's sitting there in tension with the pulley on there. So next up, we're going to put another bar clamp. So we start off with a nut. And we're going to keep it about 100 millimeters, give or take. Probably around 70 millimeters. Going to put a washer, bar clamp, washer, nut. See if we can get this started this way. So once again, bar clamp goes nut, washer, bar clamp, washer, nut. And that one's kind of bound up there a little bit for some reason. I'll try and see if, there we go. And we're going to put another nut on the end, about 25 millimeters, 1 inch. Put sharp side towards the nut, and we're done with that side. Now we're going to flip it over, and on this side we're going to put the bar clamp. So we start off with a nut, and get that in there fairways. We're going to put the washer, another bar clamp, and we're going to put another washer, and finally cap that off with another nut. Okay, close enough. Another nut for acrylic end cap pieces. Washer with the sharp edge towards the nut, and we are finally done with that assembly. So as it sits on the printer, it'll kind of sit like this. Now for this one, we're going to kind of put it down there for a second, but you got to recall that this hole for the bottom rod has to go through there. So when we're done, both these rods are going to be connected by this bracket here. So we're just, for now, we're just going to kind of put it there. And like I said, we don't care whether the washer falls off or not. It's not a big deal. For this next rod, which is the lower rod here, we're going to start off with a nut. We're going to do as much assembly as possible before we actually thread it through this Z, or through the Y rod there. We're going to do as much assembly as possible before we thread it through this Y motor bracket. So let's get this on there. And that's going to take a washer when it lines up to that bracket there. So we're going to kind of leave that there for now. We're going to do the opposite side just to get it done. So we got a nut and a washer, sharp side towards the nut. And now we're going to actually take this and we're going to kind of line them up together and see, you know, try and get them a little bit closer. Even though we're going to later change it, we just don't want to start off with it already being racked at the beginning. So, and there, that's about the same. So we're going to go ahead and thread this through there. And we're going to finish it off with a washer and a nut. And it's a little more awkward when you got two of these together to try and get them to go through. I think I just lost one of my washers, but that's no big deal. A little bit slower going this way. It's a great thing about having extra washers is that you're not too worried about it if you drop one on the floor, give or take. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and put that washer back on. Okay, so now we need to finish this off with another nut. That is for the acrylic end cap pieces. And a washer, sharp side in. And there's that sub-assembly that contains both of the rear that contains both of the rear rods for the rear lower rods. So I'm going to kind of shove this up there a little bit, put these in there. So there's all the 4 short rods fully assembled as much as we can before we actually put it in the acrylic side panel. So now we're going to take the really long rod, which is for the bottom, and all we're really going to do right now is probably put a nut and a washer that's pretty far in there, so maybe around 125 millimeters, you know, about 5 inches in. So there's really nothing on the bottom in between the printer, but we want to make sure that this nut gets far enough in there that we can adjust it later, you know, so that we're not really getting any interference, you know, so that we're having to adjust it and then readjust it. So anyway, we're going to put just a nut and then a washer. And we're going to flip it around. Remember, put the sharp side on the inside towards the nut. We're going to go and put another nut on this side. So, you know, once again, about the same spacing. And get that on there. And if you go a little bit farther, that's better than not going far enough. You know, sharp side towards the nut. And we're just going to kind of leave that one there right now. So there's our 5th rod. And so now we're going to tackle the 2 top rods. We're going to do the same thing with them. So, you know, they're a little bit shorter than the super long rod, but that's okay. I'm going to put a nut on there. There's nothing really in the middle of here, you know, until you get to the acrylic panel, so that's kind of nice, you know, so it's a little bit simpler assembly. And put the sharp side in towards the nut. And we're going to flip it over. Do the same thing on the other side. We're going to do that for both the rods because both the front and the back of the top 2 rods assemble pretty much the exact same. So I'm going to do that. And they are the exact same with the exception of having the far Z motor, get that sharp side towards the nut. And we'll call that done for there. And let's get our last rod for our threaded rods that are going to get assembled into the frame. And same deal. We're going to try and put it around the same amount of space in there. If you have to, you can always line it up and see. It's like, well, I went a little bit further on that one. Pretty quick to just adjust it. Sharp side towards the nut, flip it around, get yet another nut. So you see our pile of nuts and our pile of washers are going down considerably as we're assembling these things. And get that thing in there. Okay, so it's about the same spacing. I'll put a washer on there. And so there is our starter sub-assemblies for the rods to be able to line it up into the vision panels. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set our acrylic panels up, and we're going to kind of, you know, take a look at them, and then we're going to put all the rods in between and kind of slide the panels close together if we can. And if you look on the bottom of the panels, there might be a slight little divot there, and that's just where the CNC router comes off of its path, or the CNC machining center comes off its path. It's not really a big deal. It's not going to affect anything as we line it up. So one of the differences between the panels, you know, that you can really see versus like a Prusa Iteration 2 side panel. Here's a Prusa Iteration 2 triangle, and the thing to look at is that if you look at it, I haven't tightened any of these things up. There's really a lot of play in here. I mean, there's play everywhere because the hole size diameter is so big that you can actually rack it in so many different axes. And then for the bar clamp, it used to ride on the top, and the problem with that, thousands of us assembled these according to the RepRap wiki, where it had it on the top, and it just so happened that the Y belt for the Y axis would actually hit the threaded rod that went across here, and soon enough, as you were printing, it would actually strip that belt. So that's a great thing about the Vision side panels. I can put this hole anywhere I want to and avoid the belts and put it up much higher, and that gives you a little bit more rigidity on the Z axis. And then on top of that, these holes for what's called the vertexes, these 3 are vertexes, those are also oversized. So you've got oversized holes going this way, you've got oversized holes going that way, and what that does is that gives you an awful lot of slop. And then on top of that, these little legs is what they call these. That was a band-aid. Originally, all 3 of these vertexes were the same, and the reason for these legs is because they used to assemble these on top for the bar clamp, and they found out they need to assemble it on the bottom. Problem is, once you put it on the bottom, then the vertexes, if you had that as your base, you know, 3 of these, then your lower point on here would actually be lower than the low point on the leg. So they put these as kind of like a band-aid for that. great news is that we don't even need to bother with that, and so our Vision 3D printer is actually slightly shorter than this, or it used to be slightly shorter. I made it a little bit taller to give us a 5.5 inch Z height so that we can print a little bit taller. So good news, we don't have to do all that assembly that used to be in part of this, and so we're just going to get rid of that. Okay, so now let's start assembling these into the frame, and be real careful because metal scratches acrylic if you hit it hard enough. So what we're going to do is just kind of line these up, and we want to make sure that the Vision sides are always, where it says Vision. So what we're going to try and do is we're going to do the longest rods first. So let's take the really longest rod, and we're just going to kind of slide it through that middle hole there. So, and if you look, that's a really tight tolerance hole. So you can't just so easily slide it sometimes. So many times you just have to kind of like, twist it back and forth, and then eventually it will go. So we're going to take that almost all the way out to the edge. And the good news is that on the middle part of the bottom, on one side, we can actually put all of our rods there first. So let's go ahead and do that. The important thing is the back is the side that doesn't have the Vision, and the front is the side with the Vision. So we're going to go ahead and put all of these rods in there. Let's put our other panel down for a second. Get it kind of out of our way. And we're just going to put all of our rods in there that we can. Now let's put the two top rods in there. Like I said, these are so tight tolerant that, let me adjust this a little bit. These are so tight tolerance that it's a little difficult to actually slide these through there. But the really good reason about that is once it gets tightened up there, there's not a lot of there's not a lot of slack in there, and so those holes are actually slightly undersized of 8 millimeters. So that's a really, really good thing, because once it all gets tightened up with the washers, the positional accuracy of this is far, far superior than just a standard Prusa Iteration 1 or 2 printer. So let's go ahead and take our simplest rods. This will be the front top, if you recall, and this will be the lower front. If you just touch the acrylic panel with the steel rods, it's not really a big deal, but we're going to go ahead and make sure we get the alignment of that. The part that has the bar clamp, so we'll go on top. Part without the bar clamp will go on the bottom. And this part's a little weirder. That's part of the reason that we leave it so that it's we can kind of wiggle it in there. And if you have to, just kind of twist it. See, okay, that one's going. And they're really tight, so you'll know that once you assemble it. And while it's actually kind of like this, and it's a little loose like that, we're going to take this opportunity to put some of the nuts on there and the washers on there. So let's go ahead and keep the rounded side of the washer. We're going to put that on the inside. Let's do all the 4 short rods first. Then we're going to do our nuts on there. And just loosely tighten it, around there. We're going to keep these kind of close to the edge so we can actually, back off these back towards the edge there. And do the same thing on all 4 of the small rods. Get those on there. A little difficult to see from this angle, but there you go. And you really barely want to have the rod just even touch the outside of here, so it might not even go that far. Let's do the back 2. And keep the smooth side of the washer so that the smooth side of the washer touches the acrylic. And back that one up a little bit. And we still want it a little bit loose. Same deal here. And a washer, and then a nut. That's pretty easy for those short rods to remember that. Okay, so we got those. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing here in this lower middle rod. We're just going to kind of throw this on there. We're not even going to tighten it up very far at all. We're just going to, kind of do this while we've got access to it pretty easy. And sometimes you end up having to take the nut and back it off a little bit in order to get it to go right. So get that on there. And we're not even going to put it very far at all, so that gives us a little bit of wiggle room to be able to work with. So we're going to do the same thing with the top part here. Make sure you get the smooth side on the inside. Let's do both those. It's going to have a nut. And I'm not even going to back it up even any farther than that. So do the same thing with the back one. Actually, it's the front one, but just kind of get it on there. And there we go. So we're going to kind of leave it like that, and that gives us enough flexibility and wiggle room to hopefully easily be able to put the other side on. So now we're just going to kind of move this back and make sure that the vision on here is on the same side as the vision on there. So this looks like the correct orientation on there. And now it's a little bit harder because what we've got to do is we've got to line up all of these rods and get them in there. So what I usually like to do is back this one off a little bit and then try and get the two top ones kind of started first. And then this one, line it up and kind of shove it through there. So this is why we leave a little bit of wiggle room, because it's a whole lot easier to assemble these with the wiggle room in there. And that allows us to kind of go back and forth with some of these, and gives us just a little bit easier adjustment for all these. So we're going to do the same thing with here. Try and find where the holes are, line them up. Same thing with the back side. And if all goes good, you can generally kind of wiggle them all together a little bit at a time. And there you go. Now here's what the important thing is. What we're going to do right now is that we're going to start backing off the two lower front and the two lower rear. So these two lower rear ones of the rods and the two lower front rods. And we're going to kind of back them off to the point that the nut on the outsides of these barely is at the edge of the rod. So let's go ahead and put a washer and a nut on there. Remember, rounded side. And it looks like that one's a little less, a little shorter, or it's at a little bit different angle. So we can kind of wiggle them a little bit at a time to get them to kind of adjust out if they can. Sometimes they don't want to adjust too much, so just kind of got to shake it a little bit. There it goes. And we're going to go ahead and put this like that. We're just barely adjusting it so that it's flush with where the bolt is with where the nut ends up. So got both of those where they should be. Then what we're going to do is kind of back these out a little bit. Okay. And we're not going to totally tighten these up just yet. We're just going to leave a little bit of slack there. Same deal with here. Let's back that off. So on both the top and the bottom. And we still have a little bit of slack in there, which is good at this point. And you can see that these nuts are now quite a bit off of where it will be. What we're going to want to do is we're going to actually, after we get these four on the bottom lined up, then we're going to take that the alignment for those and transfer it to the top. We're not going to even worry about the middle lower part there, because so long as all 6 of these corner pieces are in there, this only needs to be positionally correct, and then it'll fall in line. So anyway, let's turn it around, and so you can see a little bit on this side what we're going to do. We're going to put a washer and nuts. same deal, where we only want, this time we only want the nut to just barely be flush on there, and that's where it's going to stay for now. Each one of these rods might be slightly off, you know, 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters, give or take. And so it's very important that you don't try and truly trust the length of the rod. We're going to show you with the calipers how to measure that and make sure that all your corners are all the same. So same deal with the top. I'm going to go ahead and put our washer in there. And the good news about the top, once we get it all lined up, is that now the way it assembles is that it is symmetrical for the frame from one side to the other. If you recall, how it used to look is that one side was sticking out a little bit further than the other side. Where we actually used to have it so that these were as close together and that this bed was symmetrical with the frame inside here. But on this other side, we used to have it stick out about 1.5 inches, 40 millimeters here. And so one side was skewed from the other. Well, it turns out in order to get the maximum play so that you actually have your extruder on there and go back and forth, we're just going to actually spread these out, and that way the frame itself will be symmetrical, and then this will be slightly off center for our heated bed. And that's because one side of the extruder always sticks out a little bit farther than the other side. So let's get rid of that and go back to our assembly here. Okay, so put some washers on there. In fact, you know, some people like to put the washers on, you know, if they know they're going to put washers on all of them, go ahead and do that first, and then go ahead and do all the nuts. It doesn't really matter to me. I don't care if you put the washer and all the nuts and everything on one side and then go and adjust all the others. So for now, just kind of get those lined up there a little bit, and this is going to go through a little bit further probably. We just want slack in there more than anything. Another nut. That one's going on really nice. Okay. And we don't want to, pinch these. We don't want to, force it to go one way or the other. So make sure you got a lot of play on both sides of that on the top. And then let's put a nut on the bottom, just because we know we're going to have to put it there anyway, so might as well get it on there, and we don't need to worry about it later. Okay, so we're not so careful right now that the rods on the top and the bottom aren't exactly where they should be. We'll get that fixed soon enough. For now, this is the general frame of what we're looking at, and so now what we're going to do is we're going to actually start to line up the frame and get the bottom parts set first and tightened up, and then we're going to work on the top part, get those set and tightened. And what's really incredibly important is that even though we don't care about the alignment, as far as like, where we need to have it, with a plumb bob or anything, once we get it tightened up with this method, it's not really that critical, because the frame and everything around it will automatically be level and plumb.